Greetings, everyone. Welcome to another spooky edition of Scary Stories. This is the show in which we relive and retell some of the creepy things all of you had gone through. This time, we're covering experiences from the great outdoors. Whether it be camping, exploring the woods, or even out in the middle of nowhere, these stories are going to chill you to the bone. So let's not waste any more time. Let's begin. Let's begin today's episode with our first story, The Man from the Woods. So to get you started, this was in 2012, and I was 20 years old. I'm female, by the way. It was the end of the semester, and I was looking for something fun to do. Well, luckily for me, I have an older cousin who's into camping, so wouldn't you know it, he brought up the idea of going on a weekend-long camping trip into the mountains. Thus, we set out into the Alaskan Wilderness, and we drive about 30 miles from our small town until we arrive at a forest. It's pretty much in the middle of nowhere, and there's no cell phone reception whatsoever. This means if we needed to call for help, we were pretty much on our own. Anyways, we arrive and we walk into the forest for about 10 minutes, and we eventually settle on a spot that's next to a small lake. I then set up my tent, and my cousin Alex sets up his. After about 30 minutes of setting up, we take out some of the food we had packed and get to cooking hot dogs and hamburgers. At this time, it's around 6:30 p.m., so we still have plenty of sunlight left. Now, before heading into the tent, Alex and I decide to walk over to the lake to try and catch some fish. After all, Alex had been here before, and we had brought some fishing rods to go along with the trip. This is when the first signs of us not being alone began to make themselves known. So we were just sitting there with our fishing rods, having some laughs and drinking some sodas, when Alex happens to catch a movement in the distance. Now, I should mention, by this point, it's almost close to 8 p.m. There was just enough sunlight to catch the glimpse of a shadow that was moving behind the trees. Alex tells me to be quiet, and he points to a figure that appears to be disturbing the trees just a short distance from the other side of the lake. This is when I say, Are you sure you saw a movement? Come on, stop trying to scare me, that's not funny. I pay more attention as Alex grabs his flashlight and points it in the direction we had just seen the figure. Alex manages to reveal what looks to be a large man in a hoodie who, of all things, had a machete. It did scare us, as we are pretty much out in the middle of the wilderness. This is the point where we thought he was going to run over to my cousin and I and chop us into bite-sized pieces. But instead, this man walks out from the woods and then proceeds to stare us down for about 15 seconds. Really weird, but he seemed innocent, which is why both Alex and I thought nothing of him. Either way, don't forget him because he's going to be mentioned a little bit later. Fast forward about 3 hours, and both myself and Alex had already forgotten about the stranger from earlier. We were now in our respective tents, and I was laying in mine reading a book. That's when I started to hear footsteps. Of course, I'm with Alex, so I assumed it was him getting up to use the restroom. So I go back to focusing on my book, but after a couple of minutes, I begin to hear whispers. It was just audible enough to hear, but not audible to understand what was being said. Again, assuming it's Alex, I ignore it. But then, I'm able to hear someone scratching at the side of the tent. Genuinely, I started to get spooked. So, I yell out, Alex, knock it off already. I'm trying to sleep. The noises go silent. And then, it sounds like footsteps slowly walking away. Annoyed, I exit, and I now walk over to Alex's tent. Okay, Alex, you can come out now. This isn't funny. He doesn't open. So I head in, and the dude is fast asleep. He's a heavy sleeper, by the way. Well, after yelling and shaking him for a solid 15 seconds, he finally grumbles out of his dreamland. Oh, come on. What do you want? What I want is an explanation. Why were you trying to scare me earlier? Alex had no idea what I was talking about. So then, if it wasn't Alex, who or what was the noise? Alex explains that it was most likely the wind and even the nearby tree branches. It did make sense, but there was only one problem. There was no tree branch close enough to touch my tent. and there is no wind. This is when I remembered the guy from earlier. You don't think he was the guy from earlier? The one from the lake? Alex tells me I was being paranoid, and then he says it was most likely a squirrel or another wild animal. After about 10 minutes, he's able to convince me that what I heard had an innocent explanation. Thus, I go back to the tent and nothing else happens that evening. Fast forward 2 days and everything had been going smoothly. We now move on to the final night. Here's when things get downright scary. Alex and I had been out exploring and we're just now coming back to our campsite tired, but excited to cook some of the fish we had caught. As we approach, we are able to see a figure walking around our camp. Mind you, he was also carrying something on his back, but it was hard to tell due to the lighting. Anyways, Alex gets angry, so he grabs the knife he had and he starts walking over to the dude. I stayed behind, which turned out to save the both of us. Just when Alex reaches the clearing, we both hear the sound of loud pops echoing through the woods. The dude had an AR, and he fired them into our tents. It's scary thinking about it right now, but I think he thought we were in there, and that's why he was looking to take us out just like that. Regardless, Alex freezes in place as the creep had now spotted him. The man then demands he slowly walk over to him while having the barrel pointed directly in his face. It was so scary, I didn't know what to do. If I run out there and try to save him, I would have been a goner. So instead, I needed to come up with something quickly. Thus, with the cover of the trees, I make my way closer, eventually able to get within jumping distance. All the while, I'm thinking, he's going to take out Alex. The man now demands to know why we were on his property, but all Alex could say was he had no idea this area belonged to anyone. He goes on to then explain there were no signs and he had been here before. While thinking my cousin is a goner, I made the decision to yell and scream as loudly as I could. This distracts him just enough for my cousin to go for a low blow, which apparently was so strong it caused the AR to go flying out of his hands. Alex then reaches for it, and now the tides have turned. Seeing that the worst was over, I step out of the forest, and it's now I can see him better. Guess who it was? Yup, you guessed it. The same guy from nights before, the one we had seen at the lake. Well, what happens next is us telling him to leave, which he wastes zero time in doing so. Fast forward a day later, and we went to the police station, where we explained our story and turned in the AR. After an investigation, it turned out to be stolen. On top of that, the area of the forest we were in belonged to no one, so he had lied about it being his private property. Anyways, as far as we know, the man was never caught, so who knows where he is, but hopefully he learned his lesson. Story number 2, Shadow to the Rescue. 2 years ago, I decided to visit my family who live up in Washington so that I could go backpacking in the wilderness. Luckily, they live near a pretty neat forest that I've camped in when I was younger. I thought, what a neat way to relive the past after being away from my childhood home for almost 10 years. So, instead of going by myself, I ended up bringing my German Shepherd, Shadow. I took him everywhere I went, and this was no exception. So, on the third day of arriving at my parents' home, Shadow and I take a trail that leads us up into the mountains. While walking, we saw a few people that were either runners or fellow backpackers, and after 30 minutes of walking, I go ahead and set up a small camp. It consisted of just a tent and a campfire, which was perfect for us. Once we're settled in, I fired up a couple of hot dogs and prepared Shadow's meal. All was well, and the night in the woods was turning out to be the greatest decision of my life. That would change a few hours later. But before we get to the scary moment, something caught the attention of both myself and Shadow as we ate. It sounded like tree branches being snapped. This did cause Shadow to growl, and it did surprise me. But after not seeing anything for over a minute, I assumed we probably heard a squirrel. I now give Shadow a treat, and this ends up putting him at ease. Fast forward to around 3 in the morning, and I'm now waking up to use the restroom. As I begin to exit the tent, I notice Shadow wake up, but I pet him and reassure him I would be right back. This is where I truly believe I made a decision that would save me. I decided to leave the tent unzipped. I was going to zip it up, but I thought otherwise. So I walk over to a nearby tree and I do my thing. After about 20 seconds, I'm done and I'm about to leave. But then it happens. Out of nowhere, I begin to hear footsteps approach as branches are being disturbed. Why I chose not to back up, I'm uncertain of. But regardless, I'm soon face to face with the source. A man in a ski mask that has a machete. I froze. Why would there be a man out here in the middle of nowhere wearing a ski mask? As I pondered these thoughts, he began to maniacally approach me. Instinctively, I start to back up and I think I should call for Shadow, which is what I do. But before Shadow can arrive, this guy manages to grab my arm. He then pulls me in closer, and he says one of the creepiest things I have ever heard.
I'm going to take that tongue out of you so you can't call for help.
Now, I should mention I'm a pretty tough girl. I'm 120 pounds, 5'5", but this guy was easily over 6 foot and weighed I'd say 250 pounds. I stood no chance, and I feared any sudden movement would cause him to swipe away. Anyway, Shadow comes out of seemingly nowhere and like a superhero, instinctively pounces on this dude. He goes for his arm. He drops the machete, which I now grab. Shadow, on the other hand, was really ripping into this guy as he tries to wrestle with Shadow. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Shadow lets go and the guy takes off. Soon thereafter, I get on my phone and I call a nearby park ranger station. They met up with me 15 minutes later after I walked over to my car. Well, after about an hour of searching, the park rangers come up empty-handed, and that was it. I never heard back, and as far as I know, the man is still at large. Now, in case you're wondering, no, I don't know what he was doing out there to begin with, and I also don't know why he had a ski mask, but either way, I'm just happy I don't ever have to see him again. Story number 3. They were not park rangers. This happened to both myself and my girlfriend roughly 7 years ago. We decided to go on a 3-day backpacking trip that would take us into the Appalachian Wilderness. By the way, we're both avid backpackers and we spent enough time in the woods to feel comfortable on our own. Still, even with so much experience, one thing is very important. Always expect the unexpected. That's what we find ourselves dealing with in today's recollection. So, there we were, traveling along this man-made trail out in the middle of nowhere. That's when we come upon a small opening through the trees. It looked perfect, and with the sound of water nearby, it made for the perfect camping spot. That first night there, we settled in around our campfire, and everything was uneventful until around 11 p.m. It's while tending to the campfire, as my girlfriend slept in the tent, however, I was able to notice a fairly faint light in the distance. It looked like some sort of lantern, so it caught my attention as it moved around. It did eventually disappear, but it was enough for me to go, I guess we aren't alone out here. The next day, my girlfriend and I packed up our things, and we head up back the way we had come from. Now, we were heading up a hill that would take us to the top of a valley. That's where we would spend most of the day. Once the sun was down, we once again get to setting up our camp, and we settle in for another peaceful evening. However, there was one thing that was missing: extra firewood. So, this is when my girlfriend and I head down the small hill, and we go and collect some. Once we grabbed as much as we could carry, we start to make the ascent. Here's the thing. From our vantage point, you can just see our campsite at the edge of the cliff. Might not seem like an important detail if it wasn't for the fact we both saw 2 flashlights begin to make their way closer to our camp. This caught our interest as we thought perhaps they might have been park rangers. Turns out, not only were they not park rangers, but from what we could tell, they were a couple of hunters. Thinking we could go and greet them, we keep moving forward, but we soon stop when we can see them grab their rifles and start pointing them into our tents. That sent a chill down our spine, but it was going to get worse. We keep watching, as now they start grabbing our things and putting them inside their backpacks. I was so angry that I actually forget for a second they're armed, and I yell out as I walk out of cover. My girlfriend now watches in absolute fear as the two men look over and notice me, instead of the men being like, "Oh, so this campsite isn't abandoned. Maybe we should go and give them back their things." Instead, they point their rifles and I'm forced to jump to cover as they started to fire. My girlfriend and I take off running like Sonic the Hedgehog, not once looking back, but all the while we're fearing they might have caught up. They never do, and instead we now spend the next 2 hours trying to find anyone who can help. But remember, we're out in the middle of nowhere, and all we had with us were our wallets and our cell phones. Those cell phones, by the way, had no reception, at it being dark, and we're in for quite the evening. So, after almost 2 hours of uncertainty and panic, we are able to see a vehicle. As we got closer, we realized it was a couple of park rangers. We were saved, albeit tired, thirsty, and hungry. Luckily, the park rangers had some extra water, and they drive us over to their station where we now explain the two we had encountered. They tell us that hunting was not allowed in these woods, and those two were most likely well aware of that. Anyways, they drove us back to our car, and we ended up leaving. We did lose our backpacks with extra clothing, but thankfully, we did have our valuables. That was pretty much all there was to the story, and we never heard whether or not those two responsible were ever found. Story number 6. I need to use your phone. Let me take you back to the early 1990s. This occurs in the Alaskan Wilderness, by the way. For a bit of background, I was living pretty much in the middle of nowhere, in a set of woods with the nearest town being, I'd say, 3 miles away. If you really wanted to call it a town, it only consisted of about 70 residents. Obviously, I rarely get any visitors, and I liked it that way because I was and still am the sort of person who enjoys their peace and quiet. This one evening was no different. I remember sitting next to my fireplace, drinking some hot chocolate and listening to the radio, and for whatever reason, I happened to peek out my curtains. That's where I was able to see something. A person running toward my house. That was confusing. I wasn't expecting any family or friends. Thus, I opened the window. "Excuse me, but can I help you with something?" The man was confused. Not that I could blame him, since all the lights were off and the curtains were closed. The house honestly would have looked abandoned to anyone.
I need to use your phone. May I please step in?
The guy reeked of suspicion, so I tell him I wasn't comfortable with letting him in. This angers the creep, and I can see as he takes out some sort of sidearm from his backpack he had. Super creepy. Thus, I quickly rush over to grab my 12 gauge, and by the time I reach the window, he's just a few feet from my home. Well, I fire a warning shot, and this has him running. Now, that should have been the end of the story, but 20 minutes later, I get a knock at my front door. It's the police. They begin questioning me, wanting to know if I'd seen anyone suspicious within the past hour. I then go to explain, and I give them a description of the man I'd encountered earlier. After, the police tell me there was an abandoned vehicle just about a 10-minute walk away from my home. Apparently, it was stolen, and they were looking for an armed robber who had just shot up a pawn shop. This is when I finally come up with the realization that had I not had the 12 gauge, he would have most likely broke into my home, and that would have been the end of me. Besides, I'm out in the middle of nowhere in these woods. No one would have checked up on how I was doing for months. Anyways, fast forward about a week, and they ended up finding him after reviewing the security footage along with the descriptions eyewitnesses had given. So, that's my story. Story number 7. Camping Trip Gone Wrong. This is a story from college, specifically sophomore year. It was 2011, and it was spring break. While most of my friends decided to go to the beach and drink like there was no tomorrow, I wanted to do something different. That's why, for about a month, myself and two of my other roommates had planned out a spring break backpacking trip that would see us heading out into the wilderness. I'll save you a bunch of the backstory, but essentially, this takes place in the Alabama wilderness. Now, in this story, we will call my roommates Bailey and Austin. So one Friday afternoon, we hop into my Ford Explorer and we drive about an hour from campus. Eventually, we reach our destination and set up camp near a river. Oh, and just a quick note, we were only about 10 minutes of a walk from my car. Anyways, everything was fine for the first few hours. We sat around making food, and we played guitar and sang songs. Finally, at around 1 a.m., we are starting to get tired, thus we each make our way into our separate tents. I was staying in the same tent as Austin, and Bailey was in hers. Fast forward to around 2 in the morning, and that's when I started to hear footsteps. I found this odd, so I look over to Austin and I wake him up. "Hey bro, wake up. Do you hear that?" "Huh? What's happening?" "Shh, be quiet. Listen, you think Bailey's outside?" Just then, I get a text message on my cell phone. It's from Bailey, and it reads, "Hey, are the two of you outside? What's the deal?" Thinking there is someone in our campsite, Austin now sneaks out trying to find the source of the noise. About 10 seconds later, I hear a struggle, and then what sounds like Austin yelling. I knew something was wrong, so I head outside, and that's when I see it. Austin was hurt. He had a small wound in his left shoulder, and as for the source, it was a dude with a knife. Austin later describes that he tried to wrestle the blade away, but the stranger managed to connect. Well, with all this adrenaline pumping, and this guy having his back turned, I run over to this guy, and I tackle him down like I was a football player, disregarding the fact he could swipe at me too. Austin joins in, as we manage to put him in a hold, until eventually he passes out. At this point, Bailey had already called the nearby park ranger station. Now, luckily, the injury wasn't too bad, so we run back to my car and I manage to patch Austin up. From here, we drive over to the park ranger station, where we now explain the creepy experience. After searching the woods with police, they find the guy responsible, as he had still been laying around in the same spot, seemingly off his rockers. Turns out, he had quite a bit of substances in his system, and on top of that, he had a well-known history of past crimes. Needless to say, a night we would never forget. Story number 8. The Men in Ski Masks. This was in 2016. To take you back, I was running on a trail that takes you into a forest right behind my neighborhood. Normally, I run for about 2 miles, but this afternoon, I decided to go longer than usual. This was because I would be going on vacation the following day, so I figured I would make up for it by running extra. Now, the trail I took had a lot of activity within the first 2 to 3 miles, but around mile 4, it gets pretty lonesome. Normally, anytime I run in this area, I like to go with a friend, but considering I hadn't seen anyone, I wasn't too worried. Well, there comes a point where you have to go underneath a bridge in order to reach the end of this trail. So I go underneath it, and apart from the typical graffiti and trash, nothing seems out of the ordinary. It's when returning, however, things change. I'm halfway through the bridge when a man in a ski mask and hoodie walks out from the corner of the exit. He was now blocking my way, and I stood there frozen thinking, "Great, I'm out here in the deep woods. He's gonna come after me, isn't he?" I started to back up, only to hear laughter behind me. Another man with the same matching attire. I remember thinking to myself, these are most likely teenagers playing some sort of sick prank, but that mindset changes when one of them takes out a knife. They now demand I give them all the valuables I had on me, which consisted of my phone and my iPod. I had no choice. It was 2 against 1, and one of them was armed. They now start to approach me, as I now fear that they might be after more than valuables. Just as one of them is about to take my items, I see someone approaching the tunnel. It appears like a man that's running with two German shepherds. This was my chance. I screamed for help as loudly as I could, and the man and two German shepherds run over to my rescue. These guys in ski masks take off, never to be seen again. By the way, the man who saved me turned out to be a local police officer who happened to be running with his dogs that afternoon. Honestly, I don't know what the chances of that happening were, but I was so thankful. Had he not shown up when he did, things could have turned out so much worse. Story number 9. Stalker around my campsite. 2 summers ago, I was camping with my Newfoundland at Yosemite National Park in the Sierra Nevada mountains. It was a nice location, and I was about a quarter of a mile from a parking spot where other families had been camping. Of course, I could have chosen to be with all the nearby families, but I preferred being on my own. So, my Newfie and I are sitting around our campfire, and it's around 7 p.m. That's when all of a sudden, she starts to growl. Pretty soon, there's a man that steps out of the wilderness, and he has an axe.
Hey there, beautiful. Don't mind me. I'm just out here for an evening walk. Carry on.
I wouldn't have minded him if it wasn't for a couple of things. For one, what was up with the axe? And two, why did he speak as if he had just finished hanging out with friends at the bar? I wasn't sure, but my dog never broke eye contact as he stumbled back into the woods, and I no longer hear him. This should have been my first sign to just get up and leave, but for whatever reason, I convinced myself he was just some fellow camper trying to play a prank on the campgoers. Being naive this evening was going to lead me to having to deal with one of the more frightening moments of my life. Fast forward to around 11 p.m., and I'm waking up to my dog letting out a low growling sound. Thinking maybe she had to use the restroom, I crawl over to the zipper. But here's the deal. When I go for the zipper, it starts opening by itself. My dog is now up and alert, as we're now face to face with the person responsible. It's dark, but I can make out enough details to see it's someone in a hoodie. Well, it doesn't take more than a few seconds for my Newfie to charge at him, and the dude takes off running. Once the coast was clear, I crawl out of the tent, only for my hand to touch an axe. Something was familiar, and then I remembered. It looked just like the one from the man who was carrying it earlier. I later determined, or should I say, assumed, he had been stalking my tent, and he was trying to get in to do who knows what. How he had completely forgotten about my dog, I don't know. But if it wasn't for her being there with me and waking me up, he could have done so many different things. Anyways, we both run over to the nearby families who had still been awake, and I explained the encounter from earlier. They told me they hadn't seen him, and that none of them were walking around in the middle of the woods, especially with an axe. They did tell me that I was more than welcome to camp alongside them, which is what I do. As for the stranger, he never returned, and we never found out who he was. Before we get to the last story, I just wanted to say thank you very much for watching. Just remember, if you'd like to see more, including sneak peeks and previews, then make sure to be following my Instagram, @TheCreepyFoxOfficial. Also, make sure to check out my brand new merchandise. You can either check it out underneath the video player right now, or you can find it in the link in the description below. But just know by checking it out, you're helping me out a lot. But with that said, let's get on to the last story, because it's a pretty good one. And now our final story, Chased by a Maniac. My home is in a pretty remote area, several miles outside a small town here in Europe. There aren't many neighbors, and to be honest, you could count more trees than you can count people. That's what made this home so unique. Well, a week ago, I ended up taking my routine walk in the woods behind my home. I would only be going for about 30 minutes, as my mom was cooking dinner. This would put the time at around 6 p.m., and there's still an hour of sunlight before I had to worry about complete darkness. So, about 10 minutes of the walk I'm half a mile into the woods, and I happen to see someone walking in the distance. A bit creepy considering I'm out here on my own, but on the rare occasion, you will see some of the elderly neighbors walking with their dogs. Regardless, I hold on to my pepper spray as a man who I want to describe as in his late 40s becomes more visible. Just seeing him would have been fine, but there was only one problem. For whatever reason, he decided he would walk around in these woods with a machete of all things. First thing was first, I didn't recognize him. Second, why would you need a machete? I ponder these things as he gets closer, and then he says,
"Hey there, girl. Are your parents around?"
I was scared to respond, but I tell him my parents were just around the corner. What he says next not only had me running for my life, but it gave me nightmares.
"Oh, what a shame they aren't here. By the time I'm done with you, it'll be too late."
The guy starts charging toward me as I take off running trying to properly grab the pepper spray. All that was going on in my mind was getting away from this creep. But then, as if things couldn't have gotten worse, they did. I ended up tripping, but thankfully I hadn't let go of the pepper spray. With no other option, I aim and I connect, getting him really good. He drops the machete, which almost lands next to my foot, and he starts yelling and screaming. This was my chance. I take off until I basically fly through the back door into my dad's arms. He was confused, but after hearing the trembling in my voice and seeing the tears, he grabs the phone and calls for police. They then arrive around 15 minutes later, and I basically tell them about what he looked like and where I had last seen him. 20 minutes later, after a small search, they find him near a river cleaning his face with water. He, of course, was questioned, and he was later taken in. As it turned out, he wasn't from our town, but instead, he was from the town over. Not sure why he was in those woods to begin with, but either way, that's the story about how I was chased through the woods by a maniac.